You know, it's funny how life can creep up on you. One day you're building a career, raising a family, ticking all the boxes society hands you, and the next, you're staring out of an office window, or across a too-quiet dinner table, wondering, is this it? For Karen and me, that question started as a whisper around our late 40s, and by the time we both hit 50, it was a full-throated shout we couldn't ignore. Our life before wasn't bad, not by any stretch. We had a comfortable home in a pleasant suburb, good jobs, I was in project management, Karen was a high school librarian, and our 2 kids were grown and flown, making their own ways in the world. We'd done the responsible thing, the expected thing. But a creeping sense of sameness had settled over us, a kind of beige routine that felt increasingly like a straitjacket. The highlight of the week was often choosing a new series to binge-watch. That's a stark admission, isn't it? We'd always loved to travel, of course, but those were strictly portioned 2-week holidays, meticulously planned and budgeted, always ending too soon, always with a return to the familiar grind. We'd scroll through photos from those trips, a Tuscan sunset here, a bustling market in Marrakesh there, and feel a pang of longing for something more, something sustained. The world felt so vast, and our experience of it so fleeting. The catalyst, if there was a single one, was probably my father's passing. He'd worked hard his whole life, always talking about what he'd do, someday, when he retired. Someday never quite came for him, not in the way he'd envisioned. It was a sobering wake-up call. Karen and I had a long, soul-searching conversation that weekend, the kind where all the unspoken anxieties and dormant dreams finally spill out. "What are we waiting for, Mark?" she'd asked, her voice quiet but firm, her eyes searching mine. "Are we going to wait until we're too old, too tired, something, to actually live the way we want to?" And the truth was, I didn't have an answer that satisfied either of us. The idea of another 15 years of the same routine, just to arrive at a retirement where we might, or might not, have the health and energy to pursue those, someday, dreams, suddenly felt unbearable. The seed of van life had been planted a few years earlier, watching a documentary about people who'd embraced a nomadic lifestyle. At the time, it seemed like a radical, unattainable fantasy. But now, with the kids independent and our perspective shifting, it started to look like a plausible, even exhilarating, alternative. We weren't spring chickens, true, but 50 wasn't ancient either. It felt like a pivot point, a last chance to grab the steering wheel of our lives and take a sharp turn onto a different road. The decision wasn't made overnight. There were spreadsheets, endless discussions, moments of sheer terror, and bursts of giddy excitement. Selling the house, our biggest asset and the repository of so many memories, was a huge emotional hurdle. Downsizing decades of accumulated possessions was both cathartic and exhausting. Telling our friends and family, well, reactions ranged from bewildered concern to outright envy. Some thought we were having a midlife crisis, others, more generously, saw it as a bold adventure. Choosing a van, our future home on wheels, became our obsession. We researched layouts, engine types, off-grid capabilities. We wanted something reliable, comfortable enough for full-time living, but nimble enough to navigate narrow European lanes or remote tracks. We settled on a sturdy, medium-wheelbase panel van, which we then had professionally converted to our specifications. We named her Serendipity, because we hoped she'd lead us to many happy, unexpected discoveries. And so, just after my 51st birthday and Karen's 50th, we did it. We handed over the keys to our old life, waved goodbye to confused but ultimately supportive loved ones, and pointed Serendipity towards the horizon. The feeling was a potent cocktail of fear and absolute, unadulterated freedom. We were truly leaving everything familiar behind, trading a life of routine for the great unknown, armed with a GPS, a hopeful hearts, and each other. This, we told ourselves, was the beginning of living fully, 1 mile and 1 story at a time. Our first few weeks on the road were a blur of incredible highs and comical lows, a steep learning curve in the art of nomadic living. We quickly established a new rhythm. Waking up not to an alarm clock, but to sunlight filtering through the van blinds, often in a place of breathtaking beauty, was a daily miracle. One morning, we found ourselves parked beside a mirror-still loch in the Scottish Highlands, the mist clinging to the purple heather-covered hills. "Can you believe this is our life now?" Karen whispered, handing me a steaming mug of coffee as we sat in our swiveled front seats, just gazing out the windscreen. "It's better than any PowerPoint presentation, I'll tell you that," I grinned, taking a sip. The plan for that particular day was wonderfully simple: a leisurely drive along the coast, a short hike to a viewpoint, and then find a quiet spot for the night. We felt like seasoned adventurers already, perhaps a little too smug for our own good. We packed a small rucksack with water and sandwiches, locked up Serendipity, and set off. The initial drive was spectacular, hugging a winding coastal road with dramatic cliffs to one side and the steely gray Atlantic to the other. The salty air whipped through the open windows. I was at the wheel, probably humming something off-key, feeling on top of the world. Then, as we rounded a particularly sharp bend on a narrow single-track road, there was a sudden, ominous thwump thwump thwump. My heart sank. "Oh no," I muttered, pulling over as much as the tiny verge allowed. A quick inspection confirmed my fears: a very flat rear tire. And, of course, we were miles from the nearest village. Karen peered out. Well, this wasn't on the itinerary. Her calmness was always a good counterpoint to my initial fluster. "Tell me about it," I sighed, already picturing a lengthy, complicated recovery. The smugness of an hour ago had completely evaporated. This was the reality check, the universe gently reminding us that adventure comes with its share of grit. We hadn't actually practiced changing a tire on Serendipity yet. It had been one of those, "we'll get to it," items on the pre-trip checklist. The initial attempt to locate the jack and wrench in the specific configuration of our newly converted van took longer than it should have, accompanied by a fair bit of rummaging and increasingly frustrated sighs from my end. Karen, ever practical, started looking through the van's manual. "Found it," she announced triumphantly, pointing to a diagram. "It's under the passenger seat, but you have to unclip this panel first." "Right," I said, feeling a bit foolish. Teamwork, Mark, teamwork. The jack was heavier than I expected, and the ground was uneven. Getting Serendipity lifted felt like a monumental effort. The lug nuts were incredibly tight. I strained, grunted, and managed to loosen one. Then another. Karen offered encouragement and wiped sweat from my brow. Just as I was wrestling with the third nut, an ancient Land Rover rattled to a halt beside us. An elderly farmer with a face like a weathered map and a twinkle in his eye leaned out. "Oh, bother, are ye?" he inquired in a thick Scottish accent. Before I could launch into a tale of woe, Karen smiled. "Just a wee puncture, but we're getting there, I think." He chuckled. "Aye, they can be stubborn blighters. Need a hand?" His offer was like a bomb. He had a much more robust-looking wrench, and with his help, the remaining nuts yielded quickly. Changing the wheel itself was still a mucky, awkward job, but his quiet competence and a few helpful tips made it smoother. He even pointed out a slight irregularity in the wear of the old tire, suggesting we get our alignment checked. Once the spare was on and the flat tire stowed, we offered him some of our coffee, which he accepted with a nod. We chatted for a few minutes about the local area, his sheep, and our journey. He seemed genuinely fascinated by our life on wheels. "Brave, at your age," he said, not unkindly. "Most folk are settling down, not settling off." "We figured we'd do it while we still could," Karen replied, and he nodded thoughtfully. He soon went on his way with a cheerful wave, leaving us feeling a mixture of gratitude and mild embarrassment at our initial struggles. We were a bit grimy and behind schedule, but the tire was changed. We'd done it, with a little help from a kind stranger. We decided to skip the hike and find a campsite with facilities, so we could properly clean up and get the punctured tire repaired the next day. As we drove, more slowly and carefully now, the earlier elation was replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. That evening, parked in a surprisingly lovely little campsite, showered and with a glass of wine in hand, we replayed the day's events. Well, that was a baptism by mud, wasn't it? I said, managing a laugh. Karen grinned. It certainly was. But you know, it wasn't so bad. We figured it out. And that farmer was lovely. He was, I agreed. It's funny, isn't it? That's probably a story we'll tell more often than if we just had a perfect, uneventful hike. We talked about how important it was to be prepared, but also how you can't prepare for everything. The real skill, we were learning, was in how you reacted when things didn't go to plan. It was about resilience, and knowing we could rely on each other, and occasionally, on the kindness of strangers. That flat tire, in its own way, was a gift. It taught us humility and reinforced the fact that this journey was about embracing all of it, the smooth roads and the bumpy ones. It made the freedom feel even more earned. Tomorrow, we'd get the tire fixed, maybe get that alignment checked, and continue our adventure, a little wiser, a little more seasoned, and definitely more grateful for every mile. Sometimes the most profound experiences on the road aren't the ones you chase, but the ones that find you when you least expect it. Several months into our European odyssey, after winding through the grand chateaux of the Loire Valley and the bustling cities of Spain, we found ourselves meandering through a quieter, less celebrated region of rural Portugal. Our guidebook had only a cursory mention of this area, hinting at cork forests and small, whitewashed villages. Our plan for the day was delightfully vague: just drive, explore, and see where serendipity led us. We ambled along sun-dappled country roads, past groves of ancient olive trees and fields dotted with wildflowers. It was peaceful, a world away from the tourist throngs. Karen was navigating, occasionally pointing out a rustic church steeple or an intriguing, unpaved track. Maybe we should just turn down one of these little roads, she suggested. See where it goes. Why not? I agreed. Worst case, we have to do a 20-point turn and come back. That was the beauty of having no fixed agenda. We chose a dusty lane that seemed to climb gently into the hills. After a few miles, it opened into a tiny hamlet, no more than a dozen houses clustered around a small, sun-bleached square. An old man sat on a stone bench under a sprawling fig tree, watching two dogs doze in the shade. It felt like stepping back in time. We parked serendipity near the square, a little unsure if we were intruding. As we got out, the old man nodded slowly, his eyes curious. We offered a hesitant, "Bom dia," he returned the greeting with a warm, toothless smile. Language was an immediate barrier, our Portuguese was rudimentary at best, consisting of please, thank you, and pointing. His English, we soon gathered, was non-existent. We wandered towards what looked like a small shop, hoping to buy some fresh bread. It was dark inside, shelves sparsely stocked. An elderly woman with kind eyes emerged from the back. We managed to convey our desire for bread, pão. With a hopeful gesture. She produced a crusty loaf, still warm. As we paid, Karen noticed some brightly colored pottery on a high shelf. She pointed, an appreciative murmur of "Muito bonito." The woman's face lit up. She said something rapidly in Portuguese, then gestured for us to follow her. Slightly bewildered but intrigued, we complied. She led us out the back of the shop, through a small courtyard, and into a dusty workshop. And there, our jaws dropped. The room was filled with the most exquisite hand-painted tiles and pottery, vibrant blues, yellows, and greens depicting scenes of rural life, intricate floral patterns, and bold geometric designs. It was stunning, a hidden treasure trove of artistry. The woman, whose name we learned was Sophia, beamed at our delight. Her son, Miguel, emerged from another room, wiping clay from his hands. He spoke a little English, halting but understandable. He explained that this was their family's traditional craft, passed down through generations. Sophia painted, and he worked the clay. We spent the next hour utterly captivated. Miguel showed us the kilns, the different types of clay, the pigments Sophia used, derived from local minerals. Sophia, despite the language gap, communicated her passion through her expressive hands and her radiant smile as she demonstrated her delicate brushwork on an unfired tile. There was no sales pitch, no pressure, just a genuine pride in their heritage and a warmth that enveloped us. Karen, an artist herself in her spare moments, was enthralled. She and Sophia connected on a level beyond words, a shared appreciation for color and form. I watched them, a lump in my throat. This was it. This was the magic we'd hoped to find, these unexpected moments of human connection, the discovery of beauty in the most unassuming places. We ended up buying a few small tiles, not as souvenirs, but as tangible reminders of this incredible encounter. As we were leaving, Sophia bustled back into her shop and returned with a small, beautifully painted dish, pressing it into Karen's hands. "Present," she said, her eyes shining. "For you." Karen was overcome. "Oh, obrigada, Sophia. It's beautiful. We can't possibly." Miguel translated, "She says it is a gift, for friendship." We were both deeply moved. We tried to offer payment, but they gently refused. Instead, Miguel invited us to share a simple lunch with them, soup, fresh bread, local cheese, and olives, eaten at a rustic table in their courtyard. Conversation flowed, a mixture of broken English, hesitant Portuguese, gestures, and laughter. We learned about their lives, their village, their worries about the younger generation leaving for the cities, and their fierce pride in their traditions. We shared stories of our journey, our children, our old life. As the afternoon sun began to dip, we knew we had to move on. The goodbyes were warm, like parting from old friends. We promised to send them a postcard from our travels. Driving away from that tiny hamlet, Serendipity felt quiet, imbued with a sense of wonder. "Can you believe that just happened?" Karen said softly, cradling Sophia's dish in her lap. "If we hadn't turned down that dusty road, we never would have found them," I finished. "That's the serendipity part, isn't it?" That evening, we found a peaceful spot to park beside a slow-moving river. As the stars emerged in the clear Portuguese sky, we talked about Sophia and Miguel. It wasn't just the beautiful pottery, it was their generosity, their openness, the dignity of their simple, artful lives. It was a powerful reminder that the world is full of hidden gems, not just places, but people. These encounters, we realized, were shaping us as much as the landscapes we traversed. They chipped away at our preconceived notions, broadened our understanding of humanity, and deepened our appreciation for the richness of different cultures. It wasn't about ticking off destinations on a list anymore, it was about collecting moments, connections, stories. And it was about how these experiences were subtly, profoundly changing our relationship too. We were learning to be more spontaneous together, more trusting of the unknown, more open to the world and to each other. That dusty road in Portugal led us not just to beautiful tiles, but to a beautiful truth about travel and the human heart. Living fully, we were discovering, often meant taking the unmarked turn. One of the unwritten rules of long-term van life is that, eventually, your trusty steed will throw a tantrum. Serendipity had been remarkably well behaved for the better part of a year, carrying us faithfully across mountain passes in Switzerland and along sun-baked Italian autostradas. We were heading north through France, making our way towards the Normandy coast, with dreams of D-Day beaches and fresh seafood. Spirits were high, the landscape was a patchwork of vibrant green fields, and we just restocked with some excellent cheese and wine. I was driving, Karen navigating and occasionally reading out interesting historical tidbits about the villages we passed. Suddenly, a faint, unfamiliar whining sound started from the engine. I turned down the radio. "Do you hear that?" Karen listened. "Yes, what is it?" The whine grew louder, then was accompanied by a distinct loss of power. My foot pressed the accelerator, but Serendipity seemed reluctant to respond. Warning lights, the ones you pray you'll never see, began to flash on the dashboard like an angry Christmas tree. "Oh, this isn't good," I muttered, my stomach tightening. "This is not good at all." I managed to pull over onto the gravel shoulder of the N road, just as the engine gave a final, pathetic cough and died. Silence descended, thick and ominous. We looked at each other. This felt different, more serious than a flat tire. This felt like the kind of breakdown that could derail plans and drain bank accounts. My initial reaction was a surge of frustration, quickly followed by a wave of anxiety. We were in rural France, miles from any major town. My French was passable for ordering coffee, not for discussing complex mechanical failures. Karen, ever the pragmatist, took a deep breath. Okay. Let's not panic. First things first, let's get the warning triangle out and put on our high-vis vests, sensible, as always. While I fumbled with the safety gear, she tried to restart the engine. Nothing. Not even a hopeful sputter. We were, to put it mildly, stranded. Our idyllic French countryside scene had abruptly transformed into a tableau of roadside despair. We consulted our breakdown cover documents. The signal on my phone was weak, but Karen managed to get through to the helpline after a few tries. Explaining our location, with my fractured French supplementing the operator's limited English, was a challenge in itself. They promised a recovery vehicle, but the estimated arrival time was, within 3 hours. 3 hours. Stuck on the side of a busy road, with lorries thundering past, shaking serendipity with each pass. The initial adrenaline gave way to a weary resignation. We made tea on our little stove, a small act of defiance against the circumstances. Well, Karen said, sipping her tea, at least the view is nice. If you ignore the traffic, I had to admit, the rolling hills were rather picturesque, even if our appreciation was somewhat blunted. We talked about our options. What if it was something major? How long would repairs take? Where would we stay? The uncertainty was the hardest part. In our old life, a car breakdown was an inconvenience, quickly solved by a call to a familiar garage. Here, it felt like a much larger, more complicated problem, magnified by language barriers and unfamiliar territory. A local farmer on a tractor slowed as he passed, giving us a sympathetic look but, understandably, not stopping on the busy road. Other motorists zoomed by, probably tooting at the broken-down camper van. It was a lonely feeling. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2.5 hours, a tow truck arrived. The driver was a cheerful, burly man named Jean-Pierre who, thankfully, spoke a few words of English. He expertly winched serendipity onto the back of his truck, his movements efficient and reassuring. He told us he'd take us to his friend's garage in the nearest town, about 20 kilometers away. The journey in the cab of the tow truck was bumpy and noisy, but also a relief. At least we were moving, doing something. The garage was small, family-run, and looked like it had seen better days. But the mechanic, a stoic man named Sylvain, listened patiently as I tried to describe the symptoms, occasionally nodding or asking a terse question in French. He then set about examining Serendipity's reluctant engine. We waited in a tiny, oil-scented office, drinking vending machine coffee that tasted vaguely of plastic. The diagnosis, when it came, wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. A critical sensor had failed, and a part of the fuel injection system needed replacing. Sylvain could get the parts, but it would take at least a day, maybe 2. So, we were truly stuck. Jean-Pierre kindly drove us to a small, budget hotel in the town, the only one available. It was clean but basic, a far cry from our cozy van. That evening, eating a rather uninspired meal in the hotel's deserted restaurant, we felt a bit deflated. Our Normandy plans were on hold. This is the less glamorous side of van life, isn't it? I said, pushing some limp vegetables around my plate. Karen managed a small smile. It is. But you know, we're safe, Serendipity will be fixed, and it's only a couple of days. We've handled worse. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We always do. Her resilience was a lifeline. In our old life, a setback like this might have led to more bickering, more stress. But on the road, we'd learned to lean on each other, to be a team. We talked for a long time that night, not just about the van, but about how much we'd changed, how much our relationship had deepened through these shared challenges. We were more patient, more adaptable, more appreciative of the good times because we knew they weren't guaranteed. The next day, while Sylvain worked his magic, we explored the little French town. It wasn't a tourist hotspot, just an ordinary working town, but it had its own quiet charm. We found a wonderful pâtisserie, browsed a local market, and even managed a surprisingly fluent conversation with a woman at the cheese stall. We discovered that even in a setback, there could be small joys and unexpected discoveries. Late the following afternoon, Sylvain called. Serendipity was ready. The relief was immense. The bill was hefty, but not catastrophic. As we drove away from the garage, Serendipity's engine purring smoothly, it felt like being reunited with an old friend. That night, we found a beautiful, quiet spot by a river, a little further off our planned route, but perfect. We built a small campfire, the first in a while. The flames danced, casting a warm glow on our faces. The stress of the past few days began to melt away. You know, I said, staring into the fire, I wouldn't have wished for that breakdown, not in a million years. But it taught us a few things. Karen nodded. It reminded us that we're pretty good in a crisis. And that people, like Jean-Pierre and Sylvain, are mostly kind and helpful, even if you don't speak their language perfectly. And that even a dusty little town can have amazing croissants, I added, making her laugh. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the gentle murmur of the river. This was the other side of the coin, the challenges, the unexpected detours, the moments that test your patience and your partnership. But overcoming them, together, made the journey richer, more real. It wasn't just about the picture-perfect sunsets and scenic drives, it was about navigating the whole messy, unpredictable, wonderful experience of being alive and on the road. It reinforced why we'd chosen this life, not to escape reality, but to engage with it more fully, in all its frustrating, surprising, and ultimately rewarding glory. We were learning to appreciate the resilience we'd found in ourselves, and in each other. And as the fire burned low, we felt a quiet sense of gratitude for our home on wheels, even when she was being temperamental, and for the path we'd chosen, bumps and all. Looking back on these years since we traded our house keys for ignition keys, the question of why answers itself in 1,000 different moments. It's in the taste of that fresh Portuguese bread shared with Sophia and Miguel, in the quiet satisfaction of changing a tire on a remote Scottish roadside, and even in the shared, weary relief after Serendipity's engine roared back to life in that small French town. It's in the freedom to wake up and decide that today's destination will be dictated by a curious-looking side road or the recommendation of a fellow traveler met at a campsite. It wasn't about escaping life, it was about escaping a particular version of life that had stopped feeling like our own. The routine, the predictability, the subtle sense that we were observers rather than active participants in our own story, that's what we left behind. What we found instead was a life that is undeniably more uncertain, sometimes more challenging, but infinitely more vibrant and engaging. This lifestyle has, of course, reshaped our relationship. Living 24/7 in a space smaller than our old walk-in closet could have been a recipe for disaster. And yes, there have been moments of friction, times when one of us needed space the other couldn't physically provide. But mostly, it's forged an even deeper partnership. We've had to communicate better, to anticipate each other's needs, to solve problems collaboratively, and to find humor in the absurdities that travel inevitably throws your way. We've seen each other at our best and our most flustered, and it's only made the bond stronger. Karen's calm practicality balances my occasional tendency to overthink, and my, shall we say, persistent optimism often buoys her spirits when things get tough. We've become a well-oiled team, navigating not just roads, but life, together. The joy of sharing these stories, of connecting with people both on the road and those who follow our journey online, has been an unexpected gift. It's a way of processing our experiences, of holding on to the lessons and the laughter. And it's a way of, perhaps, inspiring others who might be standing at a similar crossroads, wondering if there's more to life than the path they're currently on. If our journey can show even one person that it's never too late to chase a dream, to redefine what living fully means for them, then that adds another layer of purpose to every mile we travel. Are there things we miss? Occasionally. A long, hot bath. The easy company of old friends close by. The convenience of knowing exactly where the best local bakery is without 3 days of trial and error. But those are fleeting desires, easily outweighed by the sheer richness of our daily experiences, the ever-changing view from our window, the taste of local produce cooked on our tiny stove, the kindness of strangers who become friends for an hour or a day, the profound sense of connection to the world around us. This isn't a permanent vacation, it's a different way of living. It requires adaptability, resourcefulness, and a willingness to embrace discomfort. But the rewards are immeasurable. It's the thrill of discovery, not just of new places, but of new aspects of ourselves. It's the quiet satisfaction of self-sufficiency, and the humility that comes from realizing just how much there is to learn. So, why did we leave everything behind at 50? We did it for the sunrises over misty valleys and the sunsets that paint the sky in impossible colors. We did it for the unexpected conversations and the quiet moments of awe. We did it to feel the pulse of the world, not just read about it. We did it to prove to ourselves that adventure doesn't have an age limit, and that the most fulfilling journeys are often the ones you chart yourself. Tomorrow, we'll pack up serendipity, consult our dog-eared maps, and point her towards a new horizon. Maybe we'll head for the mountains, or perhaps the coast is calling. There will be beauty, there will undoubtedly be challenges, and there will certainly be more stories to gather. And that, for us, is the essence of it all. Thanks for being with us on this particular reflection. We hope our stories spark a little bit of wanderlust, or maybe just a reminder that it's always possible to choose a different road. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep living fully, 1 mile, and one precious story, at a time.